Remember when we were kids? For many of us, it was such a carefree time. Life was light and easy and fun. Everybody around us was a friend and life wasn't very complicated. What a beautiful time that was, wasn't it? And then as you get older, things change a bit. Things get more complicated. Maybe you start to be more judgmental of other people and really of ourselves as well. So the whole message I want to talk about today is I think we just need to lighten up a little bit, to lighten up on ourselves, which might help us lighten up on other people as well. Lighten up. You know, I think that's a message that I hear in the story of Peter after the resurrection of Jesus. You see, there's something about Peter that nobody in the world knows except for me, right? But don't worry, I'm going to tell you. Nobody knows this. But Peter wasn't a very good fisherman. He just wasn't. You know, it was his family business and he had done it his whole life, but he just wasn't good at it. Maybe it's because he couldn't read the water, or he didn't have the patience, or he didn't have the knack, or whatever it was. But of all the people in his village that fished, Peter was like at the bottom of the barrel. So when Jesus came along one day and said, "Follow me," he was ready. He was ready to drop those nets and follow. He was ready for something different. He was ready for a new adventure. He was ready to set out. Now, don't get me wrong. I think Jesus was really compelling to him as well. But Peter was ready to drop those nets and follow. And he followed Jesus, became one of his disciples. And Peter was kind of known for blurting things out, for sometimes saying the wrong thing, for stepping in it, for overextending. Now, there's some pretty famous examples of that. You might have heard about the time when Peter thought he could walk on water, when he tried to get out of the boat, and then he started sinking in the water, and Jesus had to pull him back up out of the water. Yeah, that's Peter, right? Or you might have heard about the time that he took Jesus aside and told him, "Hey, you don't have to do the hard thing. You can take the easy way out of this." And you know what Jesus says to him? Jesus says to him, "Get behind me, Satan." Wow. Ouch. Can you imagine if Jesus looked at you and said, "Get behind me, Satan"? That's kind of rough. So there was many examples of Jesus calling Peter out, and Peter kind of getting himself in trouble in some ways. And then there's the really, really big one. And that was when one night they were gathered there in Jerusalem and they're having a meal. And Jesus is very serious on that evening, and he talks about how some of them are going to betray him. And Peter looks right at Jesus and says, "No way, Lord, not me. I will never betray you. No matter what happens, I will not betray you." And Peter meant that with all his heart and soul. He was not going to betray Jesus. But later that very night, when the soldiers arrived with clubs and swords, and there's hatred and violence in the air, Peter got scared and he hid. And they arrested Jesus and took him away. And then that night, there were others that would say to Peter, "Hey, weren't you with him? Weren't you one of those followers of Jesus?" And he would say, "No, it's not me." Because what good would it do him to say that he was? What good would it do him to be arrested as well? How could he help Jesus if he was also arrested? Maybe he could help him better from the outside. Who knows? But he kept saying, "No, I didn't know him." And on the third time he said that, he heard a cock crow, and he remembered what Jesus had told him about denying him. And that was the last encounter Peter had with Jesus before Jesus was crucified. Can you imagine somebody you love just blatantly doing what you told them you wouldn't, blatantly denying them that you even knew them, and then they're crucified and killed, and you have to live with that? That is rough. And then Peter hears that the tomb is empty, and he goes and he sees for himself that, this tomb is empty. But he doesn't know what that means. And so then he leaves and he goes back home and he does what he does. He goes out to fish, and some of the others go with him. And it's Peter, right? So they're not catching any fish. It's Peter, right? And then they see a man on the shore and they say, throw out your nets on this side of the boat. So he says, okay, guys, let's humor him. Throw out your nets over there. And they throw them on the other side. And you know what happens. Fish. And he looks back at the shore and he sees the silhouette of this man. He can't make out his face, but he sees the silhouette. He sees the posture. He sees something. And for some reason, he knows. He knows that it's him. And Peter jumps out of the boat and he swims to the shore. And he gets up soaking wet to go to Jesus. And he's going to kneel down and he's going to apologize and he's going to ask for forgiveness and he's going to do all these things. But before he can do any of that, it's great. Before he can do any of that, Jesus says to him, Peter, are you hungry? Are you hungry? Let's eat. Are you kidding? See, Jesus doesn't come back to condemn Peter. We might often sometimes subconsciously think of God as the judge. God is keeping score. God marks down when we do things wrong or rolls God's eyes when we mess things up. But if Jesus is the image of God and he comes back in this way, he comes back not to condemn, not to tell Peter, I told you so, not to say, why did you deny me, not to make him confess. He just comes back and says, hey, Peter, are you hungry? Are you hungry? He feeds Peter and then he directs him to love. He says 3 times to him, do you love me? And Peter says, yes, Lord, I do. I love you. You know this. And then he says, feed my sheep. 3 times, feed my sheep. Now Jesus is not slow. He doesn't need to hear this 3 times from Peter, but he knows that Peter needs to tell him this 3 times. There's a great scripture that says, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Do you ever feel like Peter? Do you ever feel like you get things wrong? Like, do you hear that inner critic judging yourself far too often? Like you need to be better? Maybe better at everything you do in your life. Do you have to be better as a parent? Do you have to be better as a son or a daughter? You have to be better at work or as a spouse. Like you don't get these things right. Like you screw up too often. Like, am I the only one here? Because I got my hand up on all of these things. And see, Peter screws things up. But Peter gets a whole lot right. And I think that inner critic, that voice that speaks to us, it has to do with the expectations we place on ourselves, which are often way too high. Take my yoke upon you. My burden is light. Peter screwed some things up, but he got a whole lot right. And I bet you do too. You and I, we're probably great parents, trying our best. We're probably great at work, doing our best. We're probably good friends. So relax. Lighten up on yourselves. Lighten up on each other. When Jesus comes back, it's not to condemn. It's to feed and to bring life. And I think that's what Jesus asks of us, to become life-giving people. So how do we do that? I want to throw out just 3 little quick things, 3 little simple ways. First, we can speak words of kindness. Kind words are so easy and so powerful and so life-giving. Imagine this, if you would. Imagine for a moment that if you went through this whole day and everybody you saw this whole day spoke words of kindness to you. At the end of that day, man, you'd be lifted up. You'd be like floating. Kind words are powerful. We can do them. We can share them, and they can become life-giving to the people around us. The second thing is just like that, acts of kindness. To do little acts of kindness each and every day, to go out of your way, to give somebody a hand, to give somebody a ride, to bake some cookies, to make a phone call, to send a note. Acts of kindness. So easy, so simple, so life-giving. And the third one is to see the good in the people around you, to see the good in others. People have so much good in them. Look for it, see it, Because I'll tell you this, when you see the good in others, it can help them see the good in themselves. If you see the good in me, that can help me know my own goodness and value. And that is so life-giving. So I want to kind of wrap up by sharing a TV commercial with you. It's about a man who just does some simple things, simple acts of kindness, nothing big, nothing grand, but some powerful things that shape his life and the life of those around him. Let's take a look. I hope we can make that video work for you. If not, we'll have a link for that commercial. But if you saw it, you'll know this. He lives in love, making a difference, sharing his life, feeding sheep, being nourishing and life-giving to the people around him. You and I can do the same things. Maybe we just need to lighten up a little bit. Yeah, we don't get everything right. Well, guess what? Join the club. It's a big club. We don't get it all right, but we do so much good and we make such a difference in the world. So blessings to you as you live life, feed the sheep. And remember this, come on, lighten up a little bit. Now, you remember how to swim? I'm not sure I remember how to swim. Maybe I can see if I can make this work.